Hi there and good morning. Today I'm going to bring you along as we do some potatoes in the pressure canner. I've got them washed and peeled and then washed again, and we are going to dice them up and put them in their jars, and then we're going to pressure can them right here. So you do want to peel your potatoes. It's not recommended that you keep the skins on them when you are canning, so make sure and peel them. And then if they're small, you know, just your little new potatoes, then you can actually just leave them whole. But mine are quite large russets, and so I am going to be dicing them up. So let's go ahead and get started. My pressure canner can hold 7 quarts, and so that's what we're going to be doing today. And as I said, I've got them washed up and peeled, and we're going to just start dicing. All right, and I do have my pot with some water in it. So as I chop my potatoes, I'll go ahead and put them in here, and it will help prevent discoloration. It is not recommended that you raw pack potatoes, so we do need to boil them for about 2 to 3 minutes after we get them all diced up. And with this pot ready to go, we'll just stick them in here and then start them boiling. All right, so I've got all of my potatoes in my pot. I had washed and peeled enough for 6 quarts, so maybe just a little extra. So that'll be fine. We'll just do 6 quarts instead of 7. Behind my potatoes, I do have a tea kettle going to make me some boiling water, because since this is hot pack, once we put our potatoes in our jars, we are going to pour hot water to cover. And potatoes have a headspace of 1 inch, but first we need to bring this to a boil, and since these are small cubes of potatoes, we will boil them for 2 minutes before we put them in our jars. And I'm actually going to get this to start boiling before I turn on my canner. Now this is, as I said, a hot pack, which, as we talked about in our beef broth video, if you have hot jars, hot food, you need a hot canner. But because it takes a while to get potatoes, water, everything up to a boil, I'm gonna wait, start boiling before I turn my canner on to get warm, because since I'm pressure canning, I don't wanna lose all my liquid I have in there if I get it warm too soon. If you're water bath canning something like tomato sauce, you would wanna start your water when you start your tomatoes boiling, because this will take longer to bring to a boil than like a whole pot of tomatoes, just because you're gonna have to cover your jars by 2 inches, so you're gonna have a lot of water in here. But since this is just pressure canning and we've only got this much water in, it'll just take a minute to warm that up. So we'll wait to turn that on until our potatoes start to boil. Now, as we're waiting for our potatoes to boil, I got my jars out, and I am just gonna run my finger on the lips to make sure there are no chips, because if there are, then your lids will not seal, because they will not have full contact. So those are all good. And then I've told you in the past, it is not required anymore to simmer your lids, but I still like to get some really warm water and just let my lids sit in there just to soften the seal up. You don't have to, it's just something I like to do. And I do like to stir just a little bit every now and then, because you don't want your potatoes to scorch it all on the bottom. And they really shouldn't, but again, it's always better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to boiling, so I went ahead and I turned on my canner to get it warmed up. And then my teapot did come up to a boil, and I turned it off because it just needs to be hot. It doesn't need to actually be boiling. We just want everything to be warm because it's a hot pack. So here, any second now, my potatoes will start boiling, and then we'll time them for 2 minutes, and then we will jar them up. All right, now my potatoes are starting to boil. They're not quite all the way through, they're just mostly starting on the outside. But I wanted to tell you really quickly, with potatoes, you can add salt to your jars. For quarts, it does say you can use a whole teaspoon of salt, but I actually just do a half of a teaspoon of salt. And you want to make sure it is the non-iodized because it won't hurt you, but it will make your food look weird. So, and I have Redmond's real salt. I'm gonna go ahead and put some salt in my jars, and then we will set the 2-minute timer and then come back when we are canning up. All right, so our 2 minutes is up. Go ahead and turn our potatoes off. Now the point is not to soften the potatoes, we just are getting them up to temperature. So I'm gonna go ahead and scoop them all into my jars. You don't want to use the water you've boiled the potatoes in as your hot liquid, and that's why I have that tea kettle going. Just discard your potato water. And I like to use a slotted spoon, just so I don't get liquid as I go. And then I don't have to drain the potatoes, I can just scoop them out and drain them as I go. And we want 1-inch head space for our potatoes. And you want to make sure and debubble, because potatoes have quite a lot of gaps in them as you put them in. So it's an important thing for potatoes to be debubbled. All right, and then you double check your head space, and then you're gonna want to put your lids and your rings on, finger tight. And my canner is warm now. And just one at a time, you're gonna fill your jars up and get them in your canner. Okay, there's our 6 jars. And we'll go ahead and get our lid on. Okay, and then we need to just wait for a steady stream, and then we'll start timing for 10 minutes. All right, so we've got our steady stream. We are gonna go ahead and set a timer for 10 minutes. All right, so it has vented, and we're gonna go ahead and put our weight on it and let the pressure come up. So once it hits that 15 pounds of pressure, we will time it for 40 minutes. Quarts of potatoes have to pressure can for 40 minutes. All right, so my jiggler is rocking. And if you're using a jiggler, pay attention to the jiggler, not so much the gauge. And when it's at the right rock, then you're ready to set your timer. And as I said, 40 minutes. For potatoes in quarts. All right, so that is our timer. We go ahead and turn the stove off. Do not remove your weight. You want to leave that on there and let the pressure come down naturally with the weight on. What I like to do is, after the pressure comes down naturally, I'll take my weight off. I will let it sit for 5 minutes, undo the lid, but leave it resting on top of the pot for another 5 minutes, then take it off, let it sit for 10, then take my jars out, and it really helps with siphoning, which is when, if you let the air from outside the pressure canner get in too quickly, it changes the temperature of your jars so quickly that sometimes your jars will release some of their juices and go up and out of the lids, and you lose some of your product, and you also run the risk of something getting on your rim so that your lid will not seal. So I always try to be really careful. And the best way to know if your pressure is all the way down, even if you have a dial, isn't so much to look at your dial because it can go to 0 and you can still have pressure. I always look at this little guy back here, because if he's up, that means there's pressure inside the pot. Even if your gauge is at 0 and this is up, I would wait until that is completely down. That is the thing I go off of. All right, so you can see that our little pressure valve has gone down. So I'm gonna take it off and I'm gonna wait for 5 minutes. And then I will go ahead and loosen my lid and let it just sit on top in minutes, and then I'll take out my jars. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get these guys out of here. And there they are. Thanks for coming along with me today as I canned up these potatoes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and please like and share. If you have any content that you would like to see, comment below, and we will see you next time.